So now we're on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis. Al Aviv al Imo Mimayit. But with regard to mourning for a father or mother, then he must restrict all business connections, even if it means just picking up a phone. Speaking of work, it has to be suspended. Total focus without any hesek hadas on the avelus for Avim ve'Imo, which is another example of the chumrah of avelus with regard to Av ve'Imo. As we said before, in Av ve'Imo, he should delay under most circumstances the burial in order to allow for eulogies, to maximize eulogies. And here the chumrah is no asek of any sort, no business activity at all. Now, what about a davar avu? That seems to be a discussion here. It says that speaking of work to forestall a loss is permitted to a mourner during Shiva unless he is mourning for his father and his mother. Wow. Father and mother, no heter whatsoever, even in discussing something that could prevent the loss. I'll call it Mason Kulam, Ratza Choletz, Ratza Eina Choltz. Now, this is one of the few things, and there'll be other things here on this daf that I don't have a clear picture. I need like a little bit of a diagram or something. But this is the easy one. When we get to the Gemara we're going to get to now about the neck and where he has to rip it, that's even more complicated to me. I'm trying to picture what it looks like. But anyway, this one is difficult for me as well. And choletz here, in the past we spoke about chalitzas tefillin, taking off his tefillin. But here we're talking about taking off some part of his garment on the shoulder. And in the translation that I have, based on Rashi, he writes that after Kriya, the mourner slides his hand through the ripped portion to expose his shoulder and his arm. Honestly, I'm not familiar with this minhag. But in any event, it's not a requirement unless it's al aviv al imo choletz. If he's mourning for a parent, then he must bare his shoulder. Umaisa begadol adar echad shemeis aviv ubikesh lachlotz. So we're talking about the gadol adar, one of the greats of the generation. He lost his father. He wanted to bare his shoulder as a kiyum of avelus. Ubikesh gadol adar acher she'imo lachlotz. There was another great man in the generation who also wanted to express his empathy and bare his shoulder together with the gadol adar. And therefore, v'nimna v'lo cholatz. The person who is in avelus, who lost his father, decided he's not going to bare his shoulder. He didn't want to embarrass. He didn't want to cause the other gadol to have to bare his shoulder as a matter of empathy, which would lower the kavod of that gadol. Now, the Gemara now is going to vacillate exactly what the specifics are of this case, and then we'll get back to the Brisa in a minute. But Omar Abaye, gadol adar Rebbe, it was Rebbe who lost his father, and we'll see the other possibility in a minute. And who is the other gadol adar that was with him? That was Rabbi Yaakov bar Ach. So according to this girsa, Rebbe wanted to expose his shoulder, but he didn't do so because he knew that Rabbi Yaakov bar Ach would do the same as an empathetic act of avelus, and that would be a b'chisas hakavod for Rabbi Yaakov bar Ach. Ika Diamri. Now we have a different tradition. That's exactly what happened. Gadol adar Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. When the Brisa refers to Gadol adar, who lost his father, it was not Rebbe who lost his father. It was Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha and Gadol Hador she'imo Rebbe. And Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha refrained from bearing his shoulder because he didn't want Rebbe to have to go ahead and bear his shoulder as an act of empathy. So Gemara says, "Fine, Bishleim l'man diyomer Gadol Hador she'imo Rebbe." If you're going according to the Ika Diamri, so Hainu did Nimna v'lo Chalatz. We now understand very well why Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha was inhibited about bearing his shoulder, because he knew that Rebbe would probably do the same, and that would be a Pchisa Kavod and Kavod of Rebbe. Elaman diyomer Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. According, if we say that the Gadol Hador Imo was Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba, and who is the one who lost his father was none other than Rebbe, is Amai Nimna v'lo Chalatz. Now, what do you mean Amai Nimna v'lo Chalatz? After all, we know the answer to that question. The reason why he was inhibited about bearing his shoulders because he didn't want to lower the covet of Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha. So what's the Gemara's kasha? The Gemara says that who was Rebbe's father? Just 1 second. Yeah, who was Rebbe's father? It was none other than Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. And what was the status of Reb Shimon Gamliel? Nasiham. This is not a question of Chisas HaKavod by doing this act of Chalitza, bearing the shoulder. Every single Jew is obligated. We're going to see this over and over again, that there's special dinim of Avelus for the entire public when it comes to the loss of the Nasi. The Nasi represents the entire Knesset Yisrael, and he serves them. So the Gemara leaves this as a kash. So basically, it doesn't make sense that Rebbe would have refrained from doing this chalitza because of someone else that would have to do chalitza, because everybody has to do chalitza, because we're talking about the death of Rebbe's father, who's none other than Nasi, Reb Shimon Gamliel. Now we go back to the Bryce. We interrupted in the middle. Al kol amesim kulam mistaper li'achar shloshim yom al ovimo ad she'yigara bo chavero. The Isur of Tiskoretz and Giluach that applies to all Avelim, meaning any relative that died, except for Avimo, is limited to Shloshim. But after Shloshim, go ahead and take it hack. But for Avimo, the Isur of Giluach continues even after the Shloshim, until his friends say, "Look, you got to take a haircut. You look terrible. Your hair is growing too long." But Shloshim is only a month, so it's very shayat that let's say he had taken a haircut before the Avelus, that it might be 3 months until Ad Shigara Bo Chaver. But that's how Avim. What other chumras do we have for Avim? Al Kol Amesim. If you lose any relatives, Kulam. Nichnas Beis HaSimcha Li'achar Shloshim Yom. After 30 days, you're allowed to enter into a Beis HaSimcha. Let's say a chasana, but alavim aleachar shnei masar chodesh. It's an avelus of 12 months. Later on, we're going to see that the avelus for avimo might even extend beyond 12 months. Amar Rabba Bar Chana ulesimchas mereus. Okay, here we have a big machlokas rishon. We had to learn this Gemara. Let's see. We said that with regard to all krovim, other than of the imo, after Shloshim, he's permitted to go into a Beis HaSimcha. Says Rabbi Bar Bachana, that's not so posh. We're going to whittle that down. Beis HaSimcha that he's allowed to enter into is only Simchas Mereis. It's a low ebb simcha. I'm going according to one shita based on Rashi in the Rishonim. So that's a low, what's called, when you measure on the Richter scale, this is a low Richter scale simcha. It's called Simchas Mereis. Let's say we get together, a bunch of friends and we have a meal together. I don't know what you do during this joyous occasion, have speakers or maybe not, I don't know. But if it's a true celebration, which would mean, let's say, a chasen, then even after Shloshim Yom, even on Shar Krovim, he would not be allowed to attend. That's Rashi sheet. However, the Ramban and the Ritva have the exact opposite sheet. That a true celebration, like a wedding, that's mutter immediately after Shloshim ends. But Simchas Mereis, that's awesome. Because in the case of a chasana, we could be more mekil because it's a mitzvah to attend the simcha. Meisvei will ask you a kasha braysa ulesimcha l'mereus shloshim yom. It says both simcha and mereus after 30 days. Apparently, it makes no difference, and even for a true simcha, it's mutter after shloshim. Gotcha. So the Gemara doesn't answer that question. Ameimer masni hachi. Amar Rabba bar Bachana ulesimchas mereus mutter likanes lialta. That Rabba bar Bachana went on record as saying that in the case of Simchas Mereus, he's allowed to participate immediately after Shloshim. So the Gemara asks, "Vatanya l'simcha shloshim u'lemereus shloshim." Shloshim meaning he has to wait till after Shloshim. Even in the case of Mereus, whereas according to the second formulation of Rabba bar Bachana, it would seem that l'simchas mereus mutter likanes lialta. And I think that the word lialta here means right after Shiva. Let's see if I'm right. You have something there? Oh, excellent. Miyad achar Shiva. I don't know why he doesn't spell it that. Lo kasha ha arisutza ha before anusa. For anusa is a payment, like when I pay you back. Tira'on, right? The noun and the shorish of the word for anusa here is not peronios, has to do with bad tidings, but rather payment. And it's really fascinating. This is a sociology that maybe we're not so familiar with, but let's say you host something for me, I will pay you back and host something for you, like a quid pro quo. So Arisusa is the first banquet, whereas Puanusa is the reciprocal banquet, when I pay you back. So it means the following, if I understand correctly, and then we'll check it out here. If, let's say, your friend hosted some sort of gathering, and we have a rotation. No, this time you host the gathering, next time I'll host the gathering. And now, after you hosted the gathering and it was my turn, let's say, according to the rotation, I was next online. Like you remember some schools that tell you, oh, who's going to donate the child shudas, next Shabbos and Shabbos after. So if I was next online, and then Nebuch, that person who was next online became an Ovel. So it's his turn to reciprocate, and he's within Shloshim. And the halacha is that because of his obligation of reciprocity, he will host that Simchas Mereim in his house, even during Shloshim. The Brisa says, Al kol ha-mesim kulum korea tefach. The minimum amount for kriya is 1 tefach. And now we're talking about other relatives. But alav v'imo ad sheyigalas libo, has to rip it until he exposes his heart. Rabbi Abba, how do we know that a tefach is the minimum amount of a kriya? Vayachzek David b'begadav vayikraim. And David rendered his garments when he heard that Shaul HaMelech and Yonasan and many Jews had fallen in battle. The Ein Achiza, since the pasuk says Vayachzek, so he took hold of it. Pachos mi tefach. You don't want to grab onto something; it's got to be at least a tefach. Wondering if anybody quotes the Gemara in Bava Metzia about Shnayim Ochsim B'Talis. No, I don't see. Al kol ha-mesim kulam. Again, we're learning the chumras of Avivim. On other relatives, afilu lavash asar chaluk meinu korea ela elyon. If he has 10 garments, he just rips the top outer garment. Alav v'imo korea es kulam. He will have to render all the garments. V'afikus. V'afikar suso ena ma'akeves. Let's say he wraps something around his neck and it covers part of his body. That doesn't require kriya. Echad ha'isha, both men and women are obligated in the process, in the context of avelis and kriya. However, we have to worry about tznius in the case of an isha. Therefore, Rav Shimon Elazar Omer isha korases hatachton matziraso lachorea v'chozeres v'korases ha'elyon. In order that she shouldn't expose any part of her body, and there's a mitzvah of tznius, and now we're talking about a woman who lost one of her parents, where we said that korea es kulam, he has to rip all his garments. So what should she do in the context of her kriya on one of her parents, so that her body remains covered? What she does is that she, like, in a sense, puts her hand inside to rip the inner garment, but she's covered the whole time by the outer garment. And then what she does is the part of the garment that is inside her body that was ripped, now she sort of puts it back into its place. So that when she rips now the outer garment, her skin is not exposed. I'll call it Mesim Kulam, Ratza Mavdil, Kami Safa Shalom, Ratza Eino Mavdil. Okay, this is what I mentioned before. I need a little bit of a diagram here. He says that there's a neck, right? There's a slit for your neck, right? You put like a poncho, you put them, and there's a what's it called in English? A safa in Hebrew. There is a
it's literally a lip.
Right. No, but I'm thinking of a particular word. Just give me a second; it'll pop in. A border, I think it's a border, right? So even if you don't, like, if you look at your undershirt or something, you'll see that there's a border around, because otherwise, you know, this, if you don't have a border or stitching around it, it's just gonna fall apart. And now the question is, how do you do kriya? Al imo mavdil, you don't have a choice. You're required to do havdalah. For other relatives, you have a choice whether you do havdalah, you don't do it. So what is havdalah? Says that Havdalah means that he has to begin the tear beyond the next slit, beyond the next slit. In other words, I can't go into all the details because I don't understand all the details, but if you rip from the slit let's say the slit comes down on an angle, let's say, for example, and you rip it down here, then it's not obvious that you've done a kriya because it's not nikar, it's not a kriya nikaris, because maybe he's extending the slit. So he has to somehow, in the case of parents, do a havdalah, which means that he has to rip the entire slit from the back towards the front, I guess, something along that line. But in any event, but what we have to understand is the concept, at least the concept is clear. He needs a kriya ha nikeres. That's obvious to, no one could think that, maybe this is part of the slit for his head to fit in, and it's got to be obvious. So you got to rip it beyond the slit, the next slit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol kriya, for any relative, if he doesn't separate the garment beyond the border of the next slit, just uselessness. It's meaningless. It's tiflis. It's shtuyot, as we would say. It's not a kiyum of kriya. In other words, every kriya, by definition, according to Rabbi Yehuda, requires a kriya hanikeres. If the rent appears to be no more than an extension of the slit, it's not nikeres. And therefore, in cases of all deceased relatives, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Avel fulfills the rending obligation only if he separates the garment beyond the border of the next slit. Beyond the border of the next slit. I wish I had a picture of him. Rabbi Abba, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, and now we're looking at Elisha who sees his Rebbe, that's Elio, go up to heaven. And the law is that when your Rebbe departs from this world, you have to do kriya. And it says he rips it into two. So why do you have to mention he rips it into two? I mean, as soon as you do a kriya, you rip it into two. Don't I know that there's a tear and there are pieces on both sides of the tear? So why did the pasuk have to add vayikreim l'shnayim? El shenirim kruim kishnayim. It has to be nikar. It has to be obvious that the kriya sets up, a complete kriya by renting the next slit, as we said. Al kol hamesim sholel liachar shiva umeach liachar shloshim. There are two stages to the process of repairing a ripped garment. Stage number one is called sholel, and number two is called ichlui, ma'achel. So sholel means that you just attach the pieces that were ripped with some sort of stitching, but you don't do a full-fledged fixing of them. It's called a temporary repair. It's long, loose stitches. That's called sholel. After Shiva, he can do sholel. But if he wants to do ichlui and really sew it up professionally, then he has to wait until after Shloshim. But I love the imo. We don't even allow him to do sholel until after Shloshim. The eino ma'achal yolo, and he's never allowed to sew it properly. However, that's only for a man. But what about a female mourner or isha? Sholalto li'alter mipnei kvod. She'll be allowed to do this loose stitching, a temporary repair, immediately after kriya. Mipnei kvoda. Because for a woman to walk around with a garment that's ripped is not covered. It's dishonorable for a woman to wear a rent garment that has not been basted. I didn't get a chance to look this up in halach and shulchan aruch, because I've seen women that just walk around with kriya. So I don't know if we accepted this minhag. Ki also Rabban Rabbi Yochanan, Rabban came from Bavel. He came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he told us that Rabbi Yochanan said, "Al kol hameisim rota korea biyad With regard to a parent, we require that he rip the garment with his hand. Obviously, if you want to maintain the garment, not ruin it, then it's better to cut it with a knife. And that will allow you in the case of all shar krovim. But in the case of the imo, he has to tear it by hand, or if it's not strong enough, we make a little cut and then after with a knife or whatever, and then he rips it by hand. And ripping it by hand is a much more radical kriya and its impact on the beggar. I'll call it Mason Kulami Bifnir, which means that if you have garments, then you do kriya on the inner garment. He sticks his hand under the cloak and rends his garments, which means that it's a kriya bitzina. It's not b'farhesi. He doesn't kind of gather, what's the word I want to use? He doesn't embrace the entire public as part of the mourning, that they should be mishtatif in his mourning. It's personal. But al-avimo korea mi bachutz. It means it's got to be public in nature. You have to invite the entire people, to join you, so to speak. So he doesn't hide the rendering with an outer cloak by doing it on the inside, but rather he does it mibachutz. The nasi is considered like a parent for everyone. And everyone at the moment of the nasi's death will have to do kriya. And what kind of kriya? Like the kriya of Avimo means koremi bachutz. The Gemara asks a kash on Rav Chizda from the following price. Lo hushvuli of the imo el ichui bilvat. Okay, so for this, we have to know about a brisa that we didn't get up to, which is on Daf Chavav. And the brisa has a list of those cases in which after Kriya, you can only do what we call Shole, but you can never do an Ichud. And on that list is mother and father, Torah teacher, Nasi, and Av Bezdin. So in all those cases, Eino Ma'ache Li'olam. What's the kashalo? Hushvuli aviv li'imo el li'ichui bilvat. Just a second. What did Rav Chizda say? What did Rav Chizda say that Mar is objecting to? Okay, minutes, so figure this out. Again, more of Chizda, the Nasi. Nasi requires Kriya Mibachutz. Meisve Lahushvi Aviv Li'imo Li'ichui Bilvat. I see. There are two different dinim here. There's one din about the prohibition against repairing the garments, which is called ichud. Okay, so they never could be properly sewn. That's called ichud. So that's a whole list that we mentioned before from a brisa later on, where there's no ichud. But now Rav Chisda says that in the case of nas, you require kriya mibachutz. But this price is saying that amongst that list that has the Avbezdin, Nasi, and so forth, right, or a Talmud for his Rebbe, equating them with of the emo, the Bryce says that's only as far as Ichui, that you're not allowed to do a permanent repair. But as far as Mibachutz, that's uniquely designated to of the emo. It doesn't even apply to the Nasi. Lo labar mi Nasi. So the Gemara says that when the Bryce says lo hushvu, it's referring to, let's say, a Rebbe who died, or the Avbezdin who died. But in the case of a Nasi, the Nasi is a father. He's a mother to the entire Klal Yisrael. And therefore, you're not allowed to, the Brisa says explicitly, you're not allowed to repair the rent, but that's true for the whole list. But what's unique about the Nasi, in a similar way to all the Imo, is that you need a Kriya Mibachutz. And that defends the Shita of Rav Chisda. Nesiya Shachiv, the Nasi died. Amalei Rav Chisda Rav Chanan bar Rava. Kfi asisa v'kum Allah. Like put down like a mattress, or he calls it mortar, and stand on it. It means I want you to do a public act with the death of the Nasi. I want you to do a public act of Kriya. Stand up on a platform so that everybody should see a Kriya. And that's an invitation for everyone to do Kriya. Because with the death of the Nasi, everyone's obligated in Kriya. It's a public avelus. It's not a private avelus. Al chacham choletz miyamin, al avbezdin mismol. Okay, now small is a more profound avelus. Why? He says the cloaks that people wore generally covered the left side more than the right side, and therefore bearing the left side was a more profound expression of avelus than bearing the right side. So that although for a Talmid Chacham you need choletz to expose the shoulder, but you can do it on the right side. That's not such a profound. But if it's an Av Bezdin who has an impact on the people, he plays such an important role, then you have to do the chalitz on the left side, which is more profound. The Al-Nasi, who is the father and mother of the entire Klal Yisrael, is Mikan and Makan. You have to expose your shoulder both on the right side and on the left side. Tana Rabbanan. Chacham shemes beis medrasho but. When the Chacham dies, we have to involve ourselves and dedicate ourselves to Hesped. So we don't go into his beis medrash in order to learn the regular sessions of learning, but rather it's bata. With the death of the Av Bezdin, all the bata midrash, all the houses of study have to cancel their classes. And when a person enters into the shul to daven, chakras, mincha, ma'ariv, whenever he's davening, then he should change his place. Because the Avbezdin died. Hayoshim b'tzafon, yoshim b'daram, hayoshim b'daram, yoshim b'tzafon. If you sit in the back of the base midrash, now sit in the front, and vice versa. However, Nasi shemes, batei midrashos kulam b'teilim, u'bnei hakneses nichnasim lebeis hakneses. Let's try to figure out how a Nasi is different when he dies. He says that with regard to that base Knesset in the city in which the Nasi died, and that's where they're going to set up a base Avel, they'll observe Shiva. So those who generally daven in that base HaKnesses of the Nasi, Nichnasu base HaKnesses. So what's unique about the Nasi? And that's what the Gemara explains on Daf Chav Gimel. The Korim Shiva V'Yotzim. They call up 7 people to the Torah on Shabbos. And they go out. They leave the shul. This goes on throughout the week of Shiva. They do not pray together in the synagogue as usual. Each person prays at home, and they gather into the shul only for Kriyas HaTorah. So Blineder we'll pick this up tomorrow. What's unique about the Nasi, and why it's important that they daven at home and then come in for Kriyas HaTorah.